Hello and welcome back to the Advancing Healthcare Innovation Show. I am your host, Michael Stamatinos. And if you're new to us, super excited to have you here because we're bringing very exciting conversations with leaders who are painstakingly shaping the future of healthcare. And we happen to be very passionate around healthcare innovation, adoption, leadership, and access. And if it's your first time tuning in, let me just give you a little bit more about what we're trying to do here. So we are a healthcare innovation company, and we're focused on bringing stories of innovation within healthcare to life. And the aim is really about highlighting real people that are truly innovating within our space and giving them the platform to share their stories with our community and ultimately with the world. We've got just an incredibly action-packed year planned with amazing new content and speakers. And if you haven't had the opportunity to check out any of the historical interviews, make sure you hit the subscribe button now and check those out. And as part of our just sort of commitment to keep you updated with the latest advancements and solutions that are happening within healthcare, we're bringing on board innovative leaders that are really pushing the boundaries and shaking things up in the industry. And we're joined today by an esteemed guest, Dr. Larissa May. Dr. May currently serves as the Assistant Clinical Strategy Officer for Ventures at UC Davis Health. And with years of accumulated expertise, Dr. May has built specialties in antimicrobial stewardship, rapid diagnostic testing, and a wide range of other crucial domains. And throughout her career, what's interesting is that she's just consistently displayed a commitment to advancing medical science and healthcare delivery, and her clinical interests lie mainly within the intersection of several critical aspects of healthcare, including optimizing antibiotic use and infection prevention. And as a firm believer in sort of innovating and bringing theory and practice together, Dr. May has really pioneered the application of rapid diagnostic tests, clinical guidelines, and behavioral economics to optimize antibiotic prescribing in emergency and ambulatory care settings. And her research and multiple clinical trials that she's been a part of have been an influential force in the blend of emergency medicine and infectious diseases. So it's these varied experiences that we're going to kind of just talk to her about today, and she'll be able to really give us a little bit of a keen insight as to what's going on today within healthcare challenges and how she approaches them. So we're honored to have her with us today and excited to hear her insights. So Dr. May, it's really nice to see you again. Thanks for joining.
Thank you for the kind introduction and for inviting me to the show. This is great. I'm very excited to be here, and hopefully we'll have a great conversation.
Yeah, so I gave our community a little bit of background on you, but I know that, at heart, you are a clinician, and in our kind of conversation coming up to this, I want to really dig into kind of get your viewpoint. Like, how do you define innovation? And over the course of your career, has that definition evolved? And if so, what does it evolve to?
Yeah, so I think in terms of innovation, there's a couple potential or a myriad of definitions we could think about. I used to think of innovation as something that sort of happened in other spaces, maybe advancing science and, you know, clinical discovery. And then over time, I realized that innovation is about building and improving. So, sort of this culture of continuous improvement. And in healthcare, I've had the opportunity to build several different innovative programs. And at the time, I was just trying to make healthcare better. I wasn't
Right.
really thinking about it in terms of innovation. And the more I got involved, with partnering with industry, with looking at what's happening in healthcare, the more I realized that innovation is different things. So it could be clinical innovation in terms of healthcare delivery and access,
Mhm.
and that making those processes better. It's also about product innovation, incorporating technology into healthcare. It's about partnerships. And really, I think it's also a mindset. It's that growth mindset or the entrepreneurial mindset to just want to continually strive to learn more, to grow more, and to make things better for our patients and our colleagues.
Thanks for doing that. So I remember from a previous conversation something you said that really struck me, and I believe at the time that you were technically on a sabbatical. Can you maybe share a little bit of that story? Because I found it fascinating, and then sort of how that actually helped you in terms of what your current role is today.
Yeah, so I'm actually winding down this sabbatical experience. So I can, share a little bit about why I chose to take the sabbatical and sort of
Hmm.
how my career changed with the experiences I had in building innovative programs and participating in quality improvement. So during the pandemic, as a frontline emergency department clinician, it was kind of tough. And a lot of the innovations we were working on were more in that COVID space. And so I really had the opportunity to take on a few very interesting roles, one of which was the interim health officer for one of our local counties here in California. I did that for 4 months in the fall of 2020. So developing guidance, focusing on building up testing. I was at the same time involved with our laboratory director. We were implementing COVID-19 testing from rapid point of care diagnostics to serology, having a lot of opportunity to innovate and a lot of support from our health system to do that. And I also worked with the California Department of Public Health to lead the COVID-19 testing program for schools, for K to 12 schools. So these experiences really led me to really want to have a bigger impact than simply building a program that's affecting just a few hundred patients or even a few thousand patients. But the idea that we in healthcare can innovate, so we're not just seeing and taking care of one patient at a time, but really having this impact potentially on millions of people, and not really realizing how important those roles are outside of the clinical setting. And I was also doing a lot of consulting for biotech and diagnostics in particular. And that accelerated during COVID because of my expertise in infectious diseases and the work that I've been doing. And I became much more interested in thinking about how academia can partner with industry or partner with startups. So I started to explore that space. And I really just wanted to learn more about innovation and entrepreneurship. I was in the process of working on an executive MBA. I had taken an entrepreneurship class, and I really thought that the process and the mindset was so interesting that I wanted to explore it further. So my chair was supportive. We developed a new role for myself, directing innovation and external partnerships in the emergency department. And at the same time, I was able to get a sabbatical approved by our university. It was a bit of a challenge because apparently I was the first person to ever propose a sabbatical in innovation entrepreneurship. And so they weren't quite sure this met the criteria for sabbatical, even though I was doing research and still the things that you would do as a faculty member, like grants and writing and publishing. But it really was a different space, and sort of a culture shift, in terms of learning and participating in some of the other activities that the university was involved in. And I basically started working, with startups. I became an advisor for the Berkeley Skydeck. I joined the Bay Area Life Sciences Angels and really had the opportunity to hear so many pitches and see how much innovation and how much potential there is in healthcare or at the intersection of healthcare, but also really realizing, a lot of the expertise is not being sort of matched to what's being developed. So really wanting to be the clinician that helps identify where the gaps are and helps support some of these startups or companies and really making things better for us as clinicians and ultimately for patients. And so I finished my MBA, and at the same time, our health system was focused on building a ventures group. And so I applied for an assistant clinical strategy officer position, which these are basically clinical dyads to administrative leaders. But essentially, just for me, I'm the assistant officer for ventures in October. And really, we're still building the plane as we fly it. But my boss, Don Taylor, has really started to create a really innovative framework for how we can collaborate with the university, how we're going to build collaborations and support translational entrepreneurship, but also partner and engage with industry and startups and really think about more innovative models, even just to increase healthcare revenue. And really drive the field forward. So I'm very excited about this. And I know we also have to work on that change management and culture in academic healthcare, because honestly, it's not easy to innovate in academic healthcare sometimes. It's slow moving, very bureaucratic, very hierarchical. And so we're really looking forward to disrupting that a bit. And I very much enjoy those roles, that sort of we're not conforming. We're just continuing to build and do the right thing.
So it sounds to me though that like you're a bridge builder. You're connecting the dots. You mentioned around innovation that's happening outside of healthcare for healthcare, and essentially trying to be the bridge that can parlay and bring those things into the right avenues, into the right areas. And sometimes those are relationships that need to be forged and built. Talk a little bit about the dynamic now that you've sort of pivoted into this newer role. To what extent are you focusing your time on cultivating these internal relationships, and what do those conversations look like?
It's interesting. Yeah, I've been in a number of leadership academies and had to explain my story, and one of the things I was asked was, "What is your superpower?" So I had to think about what a superpower is, and I think it's hard to sort of brag about oneself, but I realized that over time, what I've been able to do, and the reason I think that some of these programs have been successful, is building those relationships with many stakeholders and just kind of listening, and then making connections, and then finding other team members or people that might work well together. So I really actually enjoy that. I'm an extrovert, and I love going to conferences. And I get energized by these conferences, hearing the stories of people, and the opportunities and challenges in other industries that might apply to healthcare. And then also, I think I'm also a bit, yes, of an opportunist. I like to sort of look around the corner and see what might be coming next, and how we can sort of build those bridges, and think beyond our disciplines and really learn from other people.
And are you finding in your current work, what is it easier to innovate outside and bring it in, or easier or more difficult to innovate in, bring it out?
That's a great question. I mean, I think when we think about entrepreneurship, I sort of also think about intrapreneurship. So maybe I've been more of an intrapreneur working within the healthcare organization
Yes.
to try to change things from the ground up. So it's a lot of influence without authority, and it's very slow. And I when I started this journey, I thought perhaps disruption is going to happen from the external side. Um, but healthcare is also highly regulated, so perhaps it's going to have to be lobbying, you know, the government, and how healthcare and industry can really help do that. But it's also hard for external partners to come in these very bureaucratic hierarchical systems where everything frankly is driven by the relationships with the vendors of the electronic health record. So it's hard to bring in very novel tools unless they really are filling a gap that's not already existing. And so I find that mindset sometimes a little bit fixed, because we really in healthcare always seem to want to go to what's the easiest, what already exists. Um, and so it's hard to really disrupt that chain. And then you have, I think physicians tend to just be compliant. So we try to comply to our standards, conform to our standards. But when you're thinking about a culture of continuous improvement and innovation, it really requires a lot of out of the box thinking. So I can give you an example.
Yes, please.
So in quality improvement, we have a number of KPIs, key performance indicators that the health system is responsible for that are tied to, carrots and sticks. And so, they're very interested in this, but I think, we do everything by committee, which I think sort of reduces the accountability on the part of the individuals to really have this culture of continuous improvement. And, an example is, so for example, if we have an issue with rising surgical site infections, for example, and the committee coming together and trying to figure out why and getting access to data, which is very difficult when you have to go through clinical informatics. And the answer always seems to be, well, let's just educate and remind people that we need to do this or that we need to do that. But when you actually go, for example, into the OR workflow and you, as an external observer, you go to the Gemba and you're not an expert in this area and you watch what's happening, you realize that there are so many opportunities for systems improvement. And what we're doing is we're not innovating enough in that space, even when we say we are, and we're still sort of doing the same thing over and over again. What is that expression? Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting the same result. I see a lot of that in healthcare. And I think we need to really have transformational leaders that understand that it's going to be very hard. It's going to be hard to do this innovation work.
One of the things that I've been observing and having numerous conversations is you have a transformational leader that wants to make change happen, and they want to move fast. Because things don't end up moving fast, there are levels of frustration that occur, and they hit a threshold, and they end up leaving. And they leave, and they don't necessarily stay within the health system.
Mm-hmm.
They leave to go to a startup because they feel like they can actually make more of an impact outside of their normal clinical environment than they would inside of their clinical environment. And I can't help but think that we're going to need good people to make changes happen from the inside. How do we keep talented leaders in the spots that we know can make transformational change? You mentioned around some of these status quo things, but like, if you had to stay, or if you were to tell someone like that they had the choice to stay, like, state the case of what would need to happen in order for them to be able to make the changes that they would want to make. Talk us through those system changes.
This reminds me of a conversation I had with a colleague that was also going through my MBA program in a different field, but also a physician. Very thoughtful leader, very introspective, really patient-centered approach, also hitting walls of frustration. And when I said to him, well, maybe I'd be better off like not working in academic healthcare and, going and joining like industry or a startup or, even going to public health. And he said to me, Larissa, we need good leaders to stay in healthcare and also like work to change things. So when you say that, I think there is that we don't necessarily have control of. I think it is sometimes like you feel like you can do more outside the space, but we also need to have good people. As my colleague said, we also need to have good people stay in healthcare and continue to lead. I think what happens is we have, transformational leaders, especially in academia, and they're they're thought leaders. So, we really focus on the thought leadership. And then we bring in, more external thought leaders. And unfortunately, I think then sometimes we create new silos. And there's still sort of this disconnect with the front line because the strategy that's developed and the thinking, the innovative thinking that we're selling, I feel that we're often in healthcare failing on execution. There's an implementation piece, there's sort of the future state where we want to be. And there's the current reality of where we are. And that space, I think, is potentially wide open for some very thoughtful leaders and clinicians and administrators to really think through how can we bridge that gap. It's hard in a large matrixed organization that's highly regulated, where compliance, and when I say compliance, I'm not talking about legal. When I say compliance, I mean compliance of the clinicians to certain standards. Eventually you're going to slip in that standard if you're only trying to comply. So we need to continually improve, but the culture makes it difficult to do that often. We talk about systems change, high reliability organizations. We talk about, in our patient safety committees, that this is not about the individual, that this is about systems change. But I think the actions people still feel that they can't share that they made a mistake, or they're afraid to speak up because they feel that they're not being heard. So I think really the focus should start with the front line, and it really needs to focus also on retaining the front line, because it's very expensive to replace, I mean, certainly a physician. Um, and sometimes those years of expertise, may not really, or the front line may not feel they're valued for their years of expertise, because really sometimes it feels like the cog in the wheel phenomenon, even in
Yeah.
academia. And so I really think organizations need to, recruit good leaders, but then also find ways to retain them. And I think one easy solution is really those professional development opportunities. I think we don't have enough of them. We have very limited budgets for training. And I think even just sending people to conferences to learn, from other industries, or to bring back what others are doing. There's not really enough professional development right now. I think that's happening in healthcare.
Or even taking sabbaticals, being
Right.
okay with folks taking sabbaticals and creating that space where you could actually explore and discover and go deeper. I mean, imagine where you would be now had you not been able to do that. Do you
Yes.
feel like that you would still end up at the same spot? I mean, I'd probably
I
say
think
no.
no, because I think what a sabbatical does, it gives you an opportunity to do a different kind of work. And as faculty, it frees you from the obligations of sort of many of the rote administrative tasks, or that we're responsible for. And I think the thing it allows you is to step up to a balcony where you're sort of looking at the front line and seeing how crazy it is, like the things that we're repeatedly doing. And then you're looking above, from a more strategic or visionary perspective, and actually have time to reflect and plan and see how you could improve things. But it's true, I have a supportive chair who strongly believes in sabbaticals, but there are individuals, most of the really high profile researchers, clinical researchers in our organization have never been able to take a sabbatical, because their leadership has never been willing to release their clinical time. Now, granted, it's easier in the ED because we work shifts, but it's really unfortunate that more people don't have the opportunity to explore something. I think bringing in that diverse perspective and creativity, it's really for the betterment of the organization. And a sabbatical is actually a great retention strategy, because, well, first of all, you have to pay it back. But second, it really, it opens up other possibilities for the individuals doing the sabbatical. And I don't think I don't think that if I had not done this sabbatical, that I would be the assistant clinical strategy officer for ventures. And for me, that's really exciting. It's a totally new space. It's the opportunity to build bridges. It's the opportunity to build new programs. And it's a space I don't think that if I had not had this time, that I would have been able to sort of leverage that opportunity.
That's great to hear. So now that you're building these new bridges, what other areas, aside from the ones that you're familiar with, are you venturing into? What has your focus these days?
Yeah, so I think, I've been a part of the Digital Davis faculty leadership group. I've really been learning a lot more about digital health. I have no expertise in the space. I don't pretend to know anything beyond the basics of AI and machine learning, but I'm very interested to see, particularly on the execution side, how this entire new field is going to impact what we do in healthcare. So I've been learning more about that. I've been, you know, thinking about how spin outs or how startups can like sort of sell and pitch what they're doing, without it being a scientific presentation. So understanding, there are people that are great at doing science, like many of our faculty love doing science, have great, I've invented some really amazing things, but trying to bridge that gap, understanding that if a product is not commercialized, ultimately it's not going to benefit patients. And so helping faculty become more comfortable talking to potential investors, and maybe what we need is a like CEO in residence program. So a lot of faculty don't want, they don't want to leave. It's comfortable, and
Yeah.
people are interested in doing their research. And it's big risk to go out and spend full time building a company. I think it would be kind of neat to have that experience, that sort of inside experience, because I think that also makes, you know, one of the venture capitalists I was talking to was saying there's not enough people in venture capital that have actually been on the inside to really understand, you know, what makes a great team, why a company becomes successful, et cetera. So I'm also really interested in sort of exploring that space, the intersection between sort of the traditional academic space, what innovative healthcare organizations are trying to do in terms of like building their spinouts, and then, you know, how we can intersect with industry and VC, because healthcare is just, you know, it's broken in many ways. It's too expensive. It's inefficient. You know, there's got to be a better way to do things. And I think we need to start thinking outside that hierarchical model of healthcare and looking at who can be the partners and how can we collaborate together, and not look at, you know, pharma as, or big pharma as, you know, the enemy, which I think was sort of traditional in academia until fairly recently, because it's really those public-private partnerships and, you know, those intersections with startups, and really thinking about how we're going to bring products into healthcare, how we're going to innovate, you know, with digital health. And so it's like we need a healthcare, you know, 5.0 now. We really need to move it. And the thing that's really great, though, that I'm very optimistic about is things do seem to be moving faster since COVID.
Yes.
You know, we are accelerating in digital health. We are, you know, developing new diagnostics. So I think COVID had a silver lining. We are more flexible. We now allow our staff to work in hybrid models. And so there's been a transformation, I would say, over the past 3 years that's really accelerated. And I'm excited to see how we can continue to do that, even though I agree. I think that sometimes leaders in healthcare feel like they're sort of banging their head against the wall, trying to change things. And you really have to step outside, like during a sabbatical, to look and see, oh, there are all these opportunities. And we just need to facilitate them by, mostly by thinking outside the box.
Are there specific problems that UC Davis is focused on trying to solve within the next 6, 12, months? And if so, what are those, to the extent that you're able to share?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a number of sort of traditional problems that every healthcare organization has. I think on the venture side, you know, we're trying to accelerate innovation and really support faculty in being able to not only, you know, through research and grants, develop potentially innovative technologies, but how we can leverage that to actually bring them into the marketplace. So some of them, not all, you know, intellectual property is going to end up being licensed, and certainly, you know, not every spin out is going to go and become like a successful company, but we have a couple of examples of that. And I think there's
Any that
this
you can name?
opportunity to support that. And
Are there,
but
are there
go ahead.
are there any examples that you're able to share in terms of some of these successful spinouts?
Um, I think like for us, Delix is a successful spin out that was supported, you know, by a venture fund and is like making good progress. So I think there are a few examples like that,
Great.
but there could be so many more.
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of some of the blockers that you're seeing coming up, what, aside from nurturing these relationships and building these bridges and continuously doing that, are there any other mechanisms that specifically UC Davis is doing, whether it be round tables or any other forums that are inviting for folks to kind of really buy into this innovation? I mean, I know innovation is sort of like a core theme within UC Davis. It's on the forefront of a lot of different things, and that has a lot to do with leaders, you know, starting from the top down. But it's still that I believe that message needs to continuously be said. What other mechanisms are being used to drive that home?
As I said, I mean, we have some really great thought leaders at UC Davis Health, and I know they're out there and really transforming the landscape of healthcare. I think in order to really move to the next level, we need to think about that execution piece and really need to support people in being able to be innovative. So, for example, the University of California, um, as a whole, the Office of the President is, I know they have hosted and are continuing to have discussions about the role of innovation and entrepreneurship. There's several venture funds being started. Um, like how, and then how does that intersect with the policies? For example, something needs to change in terms of how our academic personnel policies are, because right now, there's so much conflict of commitment and conflict of interest that it makes it difficult for even folks that want to focus on innovation, entrepreneurship, and work with outside entities. And that's not rewarded from the academic side. And also it's you can't, as a faculty member, you also can't really, you can only do so much, particularly in the health sciences. You're only allotted so much time for external ventures or consulting. Even if you're a co-founder of your own company at UC Davis, you can only work so many hours on it a year. So I think there need to be incentives for those folks that do want to, to get beyond the traditional research lab and really get into that space. And then part of it is just culture change. It's getting physicians excited about innovation and engaging them so that they can feel like they're part of the process of change. And I'm seeing that slowly happening.
So let's just say we fast forward a year from now, and you're really digging into this role. What do you hope to accomplish within the next year? If you come back on, what will have happened?
I think it would be, really wonderful if we could partner with our internal companies and our faculty investigators and also, external startups to really test out some of these ideas and products within our healthcare system. In order to do that, we're going to have to, be flexible and think outside the box in terms of how these types of things are funded, because the traditional research mechanisms aren't going to work for being able to support a startup in, a small pilot trial, or taking some of these digital health tools and testing them out in sort of either synthetically or in the real world setting to make them more pragmatic. Really thinking about that human-centered design in actually bringing products to market ultimately. So I think that a great goal for a year from now was if we could have a prototype for how we would do that partnership and how we would test, for example, an innovative product to see if it's viable and solves a gap in healthcare. And I'd also like to see more focus, on professional development and innovation. So more people going through entrepreneurial programs where they, like the I-Corps program. We have an I-Corps program. It's pretty small. It's mostly student and postdoc focused. I would really love for faculty, more faculty to really explore those areas and think about where they might be able to contribute, and just foster that culture of innovation and continuous improvement. And then the last thing I think, which is more in my role as a clinician and less in my role for ventures, is I'd really like to see quality improvement activities also try to leverage this innovation. So not doing the same thing just because it's what everyone's doing and what we've always done. It's really being empowered to disrupt and for there to be a risk, right? For I think even for leaders to take a chance that something's not going to work and to fail early and fail fast, which is not part of our culture. So I think it's bringing more that entrepreneurial mindset to those folks that really want to change.
Letting go of the expectation that when something's deployed, it's going to go perfect. I mean, I haven't met an emerging company, or any company for that matter, that has released something, deployed something where things have just gone right the whole time. It just doesn't happen. So for us to think that is just, it's just not appropriate. So I think you're talking about calibrating expectations. Like, okay, if this is a true partnership here, then what happens when things go off track? And oh, by the way, things might go off track, but what do we do to get back on track? So it sounds like there's a level of communication.
What do we learn from that too, right? It's the it's sort of the analogy, when a company or startup has to pivot because in the process of customer discovery, they see that something, isn't going to work. So it's I think in healthcare, we don't pivot early and often enough, and we don't have that sort of mindset that we need to learn, that there's much to be learned from making mistakes, and that also, if we don't make mistakes, we're not going to grow. So it's this idea that, everyone wants to be perfect in healthcare, but we're human, so we're not perfect. So we just need to learn, be less punitive, but be accountable and learn from these lessons. So I'd also love to see a culture that allows people to try different things in healthcare, different models, and have that supportive space and the psychological safety to fail and for it to be okay.
Interesting that you bring up psychological safety, because we did have Dr. Nellie Burdett and a previous guest on the show that talked about that at length. So I'll make sure that we shout out to Dr. Burnett. So thank you for sharing that. Even just being able, like you said, being in a meeting and being okay to share that a particular project didn't go well, as opposed to just putting on this math to say that, yeah, everything's great. Well, clearly it's not, because, but what did we learn from that mindset? A lot of innovation has much to do with mindset. We've had multiple guests that have come on that have shared that. It's definitely a common theme. I want to kind of dig in a little bit more about the execution, because I think we go to school and we're taught around like strategy, but execution is a really hard thing that requires a lot of discipline and determination. Like, what makes, in your role now, what are you going to do to help escalate execution to happen at a more rapid rate?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the people that are good at influencing without authority are usually viewed as also the doers,
Yeah.
the builders and the doers. And, it's just sometimes, I think it starts with relationships and trust, because the people that you're asking to do something or to implement something or to change
Yeah.
something need to trust you, that you're competent, but also that you're authentic. It's not many leaders share their own mistakes, at least not in public. And I think, we need a little bit more of that so that people feel comfortable with change. And I think we're slowly getting there, but there's not enough of kind of that mindset. So I think starting with relationships, building that trust, and then just doing the work, like rolling up our sleeves, even as leaders, and not being afraid to also kind of get dirty in the process.
Yeah. So I know we're kind of rounding out our time here, but Dr. May, how do we follow your work? How do we follow the work of what you're doing with the ventures team at UC Davis? Give us a little bit of a commercial if you can,
Yeah.
so people know where to follow
So
you.
as I said, we're a very nascent team, and we're going to be building that team over the coming months. And I'm very excited about that. And I will have the opportunity to work on specific project. I have been sharing my stories for now on LinkedIn. So I've been sharing the story of my sabbatical, and so I would love people to check it out. And I certainly share the opportunities and things we're doing with ventures as well, as much as we can.
We're a community of doers, of executors. If there's one action item that you would want someone to take from this conversation, what's that thing at the top of your list?
I think the thing at the top of my list is I would love to see people reflect on this conversation in healthcare and just be bold. When you see something that can be improved, or where there's an opportunity for innovation or to think outside the box, to be okay with being bold and proposing something that sounds kind of wild, because those wild ideas and brainstorming is really what leads to innovation. So I would love for a few people that listen to this to go back to their work and think about an area that they can innovate in, or even just suggest an innovation, and just speak up.
Tremendous. And how as a community can we support you and the things that you want to do?
Yeah, no, I think for me, connections have been really important. Uh, as a researcher, I always want to spread the word, but I think these types of venues and opportunities are a better way to spread, that thought leadership, or to spark those conversations than, for example, a research publication. So yeah, I appreciate connections. I'm always interested in connecting with like-minded individuals. Um, that sort of peer support from others who might be listening and trying to do the same thing. I would love those connections.
Amazing. So for those that have tuned into this conversation, if you found the conversation to be helpful for you, to even just have lifted your spirit even a little bit, or caused you to sit back and reflect and actually want to do something, would you mind sharing this on social media? Would you mind engaging with it and even just sharing it with your network? I'm particularly grateful when we have our community and folks that are trying to make a difference and trying to advance healthcare forward, to continuously spread good news. A rising tide does raise all ships. And I think you're right, Dr. May, that we need more good leaders to stay in the fight and just keep doing the good work. I mean, it is a grind. I'm not going to lie, it is a grind, but I'm grateful for what you're doing, and I'd love to have you come back at some point in the future as a guest to share more. So
Yeah,
thank you for coming on today.
thank you, and I'm very grateful for this community you've started, and for the wonderful conversations that have occurred, previous to mine. And I'm looking forward to continuing to follow it.
Amazing. Thanks again.